On today's episode, I'll be reviewing the 2020 film Tanhaji The Unsung Warrior starring Ajay Devgn and Saif Ali Khan. It's a historical action film that's more action than historical. At least I would perceive that to be the case. I am not a historian and I'm not familiar with Indian history enough to know that as a fact, but that's my suspicion. I'm pretty sure people back then weren't talking about saffron flags every 5 seconds. That's just my opinion. I mean, it's like going to the Revolutionary War and expecting Americans to talk about red, white, and blue and the Star-Spangled Banner all the time when the flag didn't even exist yet. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. I'm not going to get into the politics of the movie because who am I to talk about that? But what I can talk about is what I enjoyed about the movie. And first things first, the action was top notch. And that first action scene with AJ, that was awesome and beautiful, and I just enjoyed myself. Mostly because the director and the whole crew allowed for that scene to just take its time so you can actually see AJ be a badass and his whole company just be a badass. Master tacticians going in there on that zip line, and this scene was the highlight of the movie for me personally. This is something that I would definitely love to revisit once it comes out on home video. Just the way it was set up, no dialogue, you have that overpowering score, which I enjoyed, which is one of the best aspects of the trailer when I watched it. The score just got me involved, and because of that scene, I was able to really just get involved with AJ's character, believe that he was this badass commander. Now, I've heard mixed reactions to the next thing I liked, but I'm going to explain why I liked the visual effects of this movie. I will say that I did notice the terrible renderings, the shots, the wide shots of the soldiers that were literally just 3D models, things like that. I did absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, notice them, but it's how the visual effects were used to tell the story that made me ultimately enjoy them, because it made a relatively cheap and inexpensive film look like it had the budget of a 2.0 or something like that. And people are going to hear that and they're going to say, how can you say that 2.0's visual effects were state of the art and they're top notch and da 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 da? But those effects were just used as a gimmick. They weren't done so to truly serve the purpose of the story, in my opinion, to elevate the narrative, to have shots of burning buildings in the background or set extensions, these elements that were clearly designed and used to be believable. I mean, the fact that the movie is even being as watched by as many people as there are today just lets you know if they were truly that bad, people wouldn't sit through the film. And it's just a testament to how important story and character are. Because if those elements are good enough, you will completely overlook all of those facts. In my opinion, those who are complaining about visual effects have a valid point. They were bad in places. But as I mentioned before, it's how they're used, it's how they're utilized. The action scene in the valley, I would be surprised if they actually shot in a canyon like that, because it just looked like they probably shot it on a stage. But because of sound design, because of score, because of performance, because of action, I became lost in the world, and that's ultimately what you want to do as a filmmaker. Yes, if they had more budget, those special effects would have been cleaned up, but the techniques behind them wouldn't have changed, and that's what's important. If the techniques are good enough to make you forget about the distraction of CGI, then that's a testament to the filmmaking. Because if you do give this individual money in the future, the sky is limitless. Because imagine if the budget was there to make visual effects great, to put them on the level of other high-budgeted films. Just imagine. Because I'm thinking about Monte Carlo right now, a film that came out last January and told a similar story about a relatively unknown warrior who maybe a few people knew about growing up. But someone like Tanhaji, one of the big things is people have said they have never heard of this guy, or maybe they read his name in passing, but they weren't familiar with his story, but they were familiar with the king's story. And when you look at the visual effects of that movie, they weren't really spending time adding to the grandiose nature of the movie. They were just adding explosions and little things like that. I already spoke about Ajay Devgn's introduction, and Saif also had a pretty damn good introduction in regards to establishing his badass attributes as a warrior. His scene starts off with a human chess game, reminded me of Harry Potter. I know it's not Harry Potter, I'm just saying it reminded me of that. But this one elevated that scene to a whole nother level because Saif kills a fucking elephant. I mean, that scene was completely unexpected. It made me feel uncomfortable, but I really, really loved it because A, I've never seen it before, and B, that says it all. He cuts the elephant's trunk off, kicks dirt on it. That's all you really need to know to establish how ruthless he is. And that, in and of itself, made that scene pretty damn good. Again, was the elephant CGI great? No, not really. But I was blown away by the fact that the movie went there and cut this elephant's trunk off, that I was distracted by the bad CGI in that moment because I just cared about the character and I just cared about what was going on. One of the main reasons why you care about the characters in the action scenes is because the film clearly takes inspiration, as I've mentioned previously, from other movies, like I'm sure many other Americans will mention 300, but personally where I saw the connection the most was Lord of the Rings. And the reason why I say Lord of the Rings is because in the action scenes, you're constantly seeing shots of the main character's facial expressions as they're going through battles. Now, the reason why this is important is because it allows the audience to constantly be involved with the characters. And not only that, it actually places your mindset within the battle because you relate to these characters, you root for these characters. So when you see AJ struggling and they cut to a close-up of him doing something, it's like you're in the battle yourself as AJ. And that's what Lord of the Rings did very, very well. Peter Jackson's original trilogy, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But in every one of those action scenes, you're always seeing a close-up of the characters, whether it's Legolas with his bow and arrow, or Gimli with his axe, or Aragorn with his sword. It doesn't matter. You're always cutting to the close-ups. And that's actually one of the main criticisms of Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, which he did years later, is he actually removed those close-ups. And as a result, it was more about the spectacle. It was about wide shots and seeing them do these cool things. The action scenes became less relatable, and as a result, a movie that's based in action, it wasn't received well. So, in this film, my theory is the film's reception has been so high as a result of the way the action scenes are shot. And so when I compare it to Lord of the Rings, this isn't me as a Ferengi American saying X, Y, and Z, America #1, da 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 da. No, this is me talking about filmmaking here, and that's my comparison. And also there was Game of Thrones elements mixed in. I mean, Saif's costume was pretty Jon Snowish. The way it was lit, the way it was shot as a whole was kind of Game of Thronesy. I mean, there's literally a scene in which the Night's Watch horn from the show, that sound effect blazes through the speakers. So if anyone tries to argue that this movie wasn't inspired by Game of Thrones, that in a second, but what I enjoyed the most is that Saif cut AJ's hand off and AJ dies. I really did enjoy those beats because A, I wasn't expecting to get his hand cut off like his father did many, many years ago. And I wasn't expecting him to die because in hero films, they tend to not die. In Monte Carnica, as I mentioned, she died in that movie as well. Her death in that film was a little weird, for lack of a better word. But in this film, AJ dies as a result of accomplishing his mission and retrieving the fort for his king. But what I didn't enjoy, and we'll get into the negatives of the film now about that ending, is it was set up to be this big epic moment and nothing really happened. And that's when I feel like the movie just lost its luster because it was set up as this big thing. Saif's gonna get married now and he's dancing and he's doing the... all that stuff. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, here we go. And AJ's scaling the wall, and there's literally a scene where the guy cuts himself off the rope and he falls down because he's weighing down his other troops. I mean, there's a huge build-up to this scene, and I was excited. There's traitors in the midst, and I'm like, cool, that's going to go down. This is going to be an epic action set piece. And there definitely was action, but it wasn't epic. And that's because the film just forgot about everything it set up, in my opinion. The cannon never fires at all, which is really disappointing. You have this big, huge gun that Saif Ali Khan has access to, and it never gets fired once. It gets lit twice and doesn't get fired once. People in the comments can say, well, that's not historical. It didn't fire in real life, da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't matter. It's a movie. That would have made it a better movie. One of those cannon shots fired and boom, it blew a house up or did something. I wanted to see it be used. The fact that it wasn't used was just one big tease, and I did not like that at all. I also didn't like that it set up the sister character that Saif wants to marry throughout the whole movie, and once she says yes, the brother bails her out, and then that's it. The movie forgets about it. There's no moment where Saif grabs a hold of her and there's a more dramatic moment with Saif and the wife and the brother and Ajay Devgn. I mean, there's no movie moments at the end of the film, and that really bothered me too, because what's the purpose of the sister then? In my opinion, right now where it stands, the purpose of the sister is just to establish the brother's motivation for being a traitor later on in the movie, and if that's it, that's really weak. Extremely weak. Paper thin, and I'm not a fan of that, because it could have been there. It could have been there, and it could have made the final moments better, for lack of a better word. All of the setup was there. It just needed to be executed, and what you're left with now is kind of uneventful. I mean, at first, AJ's leading the charge, and they're killing all these people, and then he gets on a horse, and he kills one guy, and then fights with Saif because he cuts his hand off. And I mean, that moment was cool that he did that. Like, I enjoyed that, as I mentioned before, but it could have been more. It just could have been more. Because there's no huge speeches by Saif's character. There's no philosophical debates amongst one another. And I just wish it would have been more movie in that moment, as opposed to just a quick and action-packed ending with no real stakes involved anymore, in my opinion. I mean, right when Saif cuts AJ's hand off, it cuts to the king miles away, and there's this weird Star Wars moment, Luke and Leia, where the hand gets cut off, and then the king's like, oh my god, there was a disturbance in the Force. My brother, he lost his hand. We need to send in the troops. And it just felt odd to be placed there. And the reason why, it's not that that scene exists, I get it, and it's fine. It's that it happened right after AJ gets his hand cut off. And the reason why that's not a good place for it is because you root for AJ to be this top badass commander because he's been established as such. And so when he loses his arm, you as an audience member go, oh no, are we going to lose? Is Saif going to take over the fort? Is he going to destroy the king now that AJ, our hero, is down and out? And we don't get that moment until after this Star Wars moment, and that's an issue for me because it should happen right away. You should have seen his arm get cut off and then see him struggle, and Saif's like, ha ha ha, and whatever, he lights the cannon again or does anything, and then you can cut to the king and talk about breaking portrayals and things like that. I mean, it just was very convenient for them to do it that way, and as a result, it lost the impact of the moment for me personally. And then it leads into one of the most ridiculous moments of the movie. Ajay Devgn holds Saif Ali Khan back with his stump. He loses his arm, and he holds him down and puts this chain around his neck, and then he dies. So I'm to believe that someone who killed an elephant, kills his men, literally uses a sword as a hammer, and does all of this badass shit, gets held down by a stump for no, like, there's no setup for it. He's just, oh no, it's a hump. I mean, maybe he was grossed out by it, like, ooh, it's a stump, ooh. And that was what it is. My suspension of disbelief just went too far, and that really killed the moment for me, in my opinion, because it just, I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I mean, I could sort of believe that he was holding the sword and the shield in one hand for a few little bits. Like, okay, that was interesting. And then it leads into like that Avengers moment where Thanos breaks Captain America's shield. But except it's Tanhaji now and he's getting his shield broken. But then the stump bit, I just and then there was just other weird jokes throughout the movie. I mean, you have the Chutia joke, which is an obvious one. The soldiers hammering each other's hands by accident. You have Saif killing his own men. It just felt off. I get why they were there, but the tone was so serious the entire time that those moments when they came just were like, oh, okay, I guess we're making 2020 jokes in the year 1600. I guess that makes sense. The story was relatively weak as well. The motivation, the character development really was absent. I actually just liked watching AJ on screen, so to be honest, I was distracted by the lack of character development because he just had this cool presence about him. Same thing with Saif Ali Khan. When they were on screen, every time they stole the show, and that's kind of what it should be when you're dealing with a movie like this, an action film. And that's what it was. It was an action film. I didn't learn anything new about Indian history throughout this film, and I didn't expect to either. It's like learning about the 300 Spartans in the movie 300. In those movies, you learn about an event and the characters' names, but you don't really learn much about history there. You learn about Xerxes and King Leonidas and the Spartans and the Persians and whatever. And the same thing with here. You learn about the Marathas, you learn about Ajay Devgn's Tanhaji as well as the king. You learn about Saif Ali Khan and the Mughals. It's just a movie. It's just a movie. At the end of the day, it's just a movie, and it was entertainment. And there are two things that really stuck out to me when I was watching the film. Something that impacted me, for lack of a better word. One is that cannon. And I was just thinking, because there's a line of dialogue in the film where it says, "This cannon can fire tens of miles." And I'm just thinking, wow, if this technology existed in the 1600s, which I'm unfamiliar with Indian history, so if it did, I'd love to know about it. That'd be kind of cool. But I was just thinking, like, wow, these people invented this big cannon that can fire tens of miles. Cut to now, and that same lineage of people, the same blood, the same Indian blood that made this cannon. We can debate the origin of this cannon, whatever, but my greater point is 400 years later, we're going to space. We're going to the moon. We're going to Mars. I mean, that's pretty remarkable stuff that technology has just increased so quickly. And that's just something that I was thinking about throughout the movie. And also, crocodile tastes good. When Saif had that crocodile on the rotisserie and it was just going and he was just cooking it and cutting it, I was hungry as shit. If you haven't had a crocodile, I recommend it. It tastes like fish and chicken. I had it last year down in the south, and it's pretty damn good. I was really, really enjoying that. What did you guys think of the movie, though? Did you enjoy it? Were you too distracted by all the saffron discussions throughout the entire film? Because I know that there's a lot of political debate going on about the movie. I don't know about a lot, but I definitely know that people have criticized the film for being overt right-wing. Did that bother you? Or do you care? Do you just watch the movie to watch the movie? Let me know in the comments. As always, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as well. And we'll see you on the next one.